I have this great tool that I use whenever I'm frustrated and confused about a problem in my life that I thought I was working on, but then I realize I'm not getting anywhere. I'm stuck. And this is a really simple tool. You can use it right now to break through and create a map that shows you the way out of the problem. And you're going to create a set of instructions for yourself to put right in front of you that you can begin to take action on. This is something you write down. I'll show it to you in this video as I do it for myself, all right? Now, whether or not you get the power to do everything you write or just one thing that you write, the act of writing it down has tremendous power in it. Sometimes just naming the changes that you need to make is enough to get that movement started, that step-by-step movement. So this is a thought exercise that I use in lots of areas of my life. When I feel like I'm not making progress fast enough or I've lost my focus, it's a great question to ask yourself, if I had to solve this problem inside of a year, what would I do? So it could be something like, if I had to earn X amount of money in a year, how would I do that? Or if I had to be able to run an 8-minute mile 3 months from now, what would I need to do? And then I list at least 10 things, okay? So the money example's real. When my first marriage fell apart and I had 2 little kids, I had to figure out really fast how to go from earning about 25% what I'd need to survive as a single parent to 100% of what I'd need to survive as a single parent. And later, I used this tool to plan my next step up, how I'd get past survival and create a business and a life that would let me pay off my debts, start saving, and be a good mom, and eventually meet somebody new. So people with childhood PTSD, you know, we get fuzzy a lot of the time on seeing, I'm having a problem, and if this problem is going to be solved, I'm going to have to solve it. Like, that's kind of the obvious thing, but it can be very hard to see. With trauma, you may have ended up feeling like you were waiting for something or somebody outside yourself to change, and then you could change. And that's the heart of the problem. So I'm giving you a homework assignment that you can do yourself, and I'll put the link. It will be down below in the description section. You can download it, you can print it, you can follow along with me, or just listen to how I do it and then download it, and you can do it for yourself. So it's called, If I Just Had 1 Year to Heal My Childhood PTSD, What Would I Do? Right? All right. So I know 1 year is like a tight deadline to heal something as huge as childhood trauma. And healing never follows a planned timeline anyway. But don't worry about that. This is a thought exercise. It's there to open up and stimulate your thinking. So today I'm going to tell you my list. And I've got the benefit of knowing all the things that I did do to heal from childhood PTSD. But I did them over a period of more than 25 years with lots of downtime and being off track during whole chunks of time. So I thought I'd share with you the benefit of my hard-won wisdom. If I could do it all over again, this is how I would do it. If I had to heal my childhood PTSD inside of a year, the first thing I would do is I would learn the science of complex PTSD and childhood PTSD. And childhood PTSD is a casual term that I use for the kind of complex PTSD that comes from childhood trauma. Complex PTSD is any kind of intense stress that happens over time, but in most cases, people with CPTSD got it in childhood, but not necessarily. So the books about the science were not out when I first started healing. But if I started right now, I would take the ACE survey, which is a set of questions to kind of measure how bad was the trauma. I'd get my score. I'd read The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. I'd read Complex PTSD by Pete Walker. They weren't written yet when I started healing, but they're there now. So that's what I would do like right away. And there are lots and lots of other books out there, but that's where I'd start, those 2 books. Now, if I had had access to these books, it would have saved me decades of thinking I was a broken person and hopeless, and for some mysterious reason, just always struggling. It turns out my symptoms are totally normal for somebody who had experiences like mine. I'm not broken. I'm normal. I'm having normal responses to abnormal circumstances. Second, I learned to notice the neurological dysregulation that is such a foundational symptom of childhood PTSD. and I'd work to master re-regulation. The first thing I'd start doing is the daily practice techniques that I now teach to everybody, to hundreds of thousands of people. And this is the twice daily writing of fears and resentments in a very specific format. And you can learn and try that in less than an hour if you care to. There's a link to that free daily practice course in the description section below all my videos. After the writing, the second part of the daily practice is meditation. It's a very simple, restful meditation. Yes, twice a day. So that's what happens twice a day in the daily practice. Write and meditate first thing in the morning, and then later in the afternoon, sometime before dinner is the ideal time, write and meditate. So the writing and meditation together have a powerful effect. If you want to know what it's like, use the specific technique that I teach and just try it. Just try it. Everybody can try it. And if you take that course, you can join me in free Zoom calls that I lead twice a month for anybody who's learned the techniques and wants to come practice them with me and ask questions. So as it happens, I did learn the daily practice 28 years ago, but back then I had no idea what was wrong with me or why using these techniques made me feel better. I just knew that I felt better. But I also went into resistance and I stopped doing it regularly. And I now know this was like opening a terrible portal for all my CPTSD symptoms to come back. So if I had my healing to do over again, I'd quit messing around and I'd just be religious about my daily practice, and I'd really do it thoroughly, twice a day without fail. And I would not quit because somebody in my life found it inconvenient. And I would not quit because things didn't always go my way. What I know now is that when things don't go my way, a lot of times that is progress. That's what it looks like, is something that's not working falls away. Also, it's just safe and smart to keep up your healing practice through good times and bad. So that leads me to the third thing I do to heal in a year. I'd quickly get out of all the unhealthy, dead-end, one-sided relationships with significant others and would-be significant others where one of us had feelings, but not both. Sometimes it was me, sometimes it was them, but basically one person who didn't have feelings was kind of using the person who did have feelings because, I don't know, it's kind of fun to have somebody adore you, I guess. But unfortunately, it costs both people their emotional availability. And neither person will tend to find true love when they're entangled in this kind of, friendship. So I'd end all of that right off the bat. And then the fourth thing I'd do is become really good at happily spending time alone. This is the difference between solitude, which is happy time alone, and isolation, which is sort of involuntary time alone. I used to have so much anxiety about solitude, and so I'd fill up all my free time doing social things that I didn't really want to do and hanging on to friends I didn't really like, just so I didn't have to be alone. Now, I know a lot of people with childhood PTSD have the opposite problem, and I've been in that camp too, isolating and avoiding social interactions. So if I had 1 year to recover, I'd cut down my relationships to just the ones that involved no pining on either person's part, no one using the other person to fill up the seat next to them at the movie, and only people where we both truly cared to know and support each other. That's what a friend is. It's somebody who really wants the best for you and shows an interest in that. For me, it would have meant more alone time. And in my years of recovery, I've discovered there's actually so much joy in having constructive time alone. Not too much, but some. And to be good at it gives you freedom so that you don't have to cling and hold on to relationships just because you can't deal with the thought of a weekend alone. A weekend alone can be wonderful. You can take trips alone, visit museums alone, go hiking alone. You can work alone. You can go to the movies alone. And after the pandemic, actually going to the movies at all is right up there with my great joys. So today I have a family and I love being with them too, but learning to enjoy my time alone has set me up to be free to make choices about being with people or having some joyful solitude, and it makes me happy. So the fifth thing I do is stop spending my money on two things that I was using out of desperation to feel better: therapy and cigarettes. I know saying therapy is a shocking thing. Let me explain. So first of all, quitting smoking is obvious, right? And I was able to do that after about 3 years of healing. Very expensive habit. Quitting therapy was counterintuitive, and that happened about the same time. So I realized that therapy is really helpful and often even life-saving to people on this channel. If you've watched my videos, you've heard my own story about how, for me personally, talking about my trauma in therapy was dysregulating and emotionally and neurologically destructive. And after trying out 11 different kinds of therapy over the years, it was the daily practice where I can write my fearful and resentful thoughts that set me free from the life I was living, stuck in my narrative, with looping and looping on the bad things that had happened to me and waiting for some kind of better mental state to just kick in. In therapy, that better feeling never came. In the daily practice, which happens to cost nothing, it was like the sky opened. In the daily practice, I just had to do it over again. That's all. All I had to do was repeat, but it was always in my hands to do that. So when I started having that way to kind of release all the intense emotion of having CPTSD, all the losses, all the struggles, everything started to calm down. So that allowed me to stop smoking. And about the same time, I was able to transition easily out of therapy. And then I saved thousands and thousands of dollars. So if I had it all to do over again, I would have magically found the daily practice much earlier in my life. I would have gotten rid of the cigarettes much earlier. I would have completed my therapy much earlier. And I would take all that money I spent and I'd put it in tech stocks. And now I'd be a jillionaire. Oh, well. The sixth thing I would have done if I had it all to do over again. And no one ever told me this back then, but it's strong exercise. It is so good for re-regulating. It's good for calming emotions, and who'd have guessed it's good for your heart, your lungs, your muscles, and pretty much everything in life. So now that I exercise, I have so much more confidence in the world. I feel prettier, I feel healthier, I feel younger, even though I'm way older than I was back in those days when I did not exercise. Okay, the seventh thing I'd do if I had it all to do over again, I'd stop all the negative stuff in my life, starting with my own trash talking of other people and their opinions, their religion, their politics, their taste in food, their music, their choice of partners, pretty much everything. And I would instantly challenge myself on all my negative beliefs that require black and white thinking. And, these people are good, those people are bad, this person's perfect, this person's evil. And I'd completely embrace the understanding I have now that everything is complicated and we're all working out a way to do the best we can. And I'd quit being so judgmental. I'd quit telling people how they should change. I'd stop putting myself down. I'd delete all the music I used to listen to that was about death and heartache and revenge and being crazy and getting betrayed and self-pity. Or I'd delete most of that music anyway. I mean, some of it's kind of good, right? But I know that it affected me in a bad way. I know that it can be trauma triggering just listening to music about despair. The eighth thing that I'd do is I'd be a better friend. I'd go to people's weddings when they invited me. I'd call them back when they called. I'd accept them and not abandon them just because I was triggered or busy. And the ninth thing is I'd be a good worker. It took me so long to learn this. When you take a job, your job is to make the boss and the organization successful, period. And I used to make everything so much about my feelings and how I was treated, which sometimes was awful. And the jobs where it felt like that, where that's what I was experiencing, those are the jobs that I was supposed to leave, but I didn't. I hung on to those jobs and just kept waiting for other people to change. And I complained and I talked behind people's backs about it, but I stayed, and I regret that. So that's something I would do differently. I would move on to a job more aligned with my own values, my own abilities, and my goals. And then I would enjoy doing my very best. I love doing my best. That's a very happy thing, actually. The 10th thing I do, and I'm happily married now, so this one is moot now, but it would have changed my whole life if I'd have learned this earlier. If I were single and I had 1 year to heal, I would learn to date. I never knew how to date. I thought that dating was just finding yourself all in an emotional bond with somebody because you already had sex with them. And there was a mutual attraction that drove you to that. And then retroactively, you would try to change them into the person that you were hoping they were in the first place. No, it turns out dating is supposed to be a getting to know you process with people to see if they might be someone with whom you'd later want to become committed to. And in my case, I knew that I wanted marriage. I always knew this is what I wanted. But you wouldn't know it by who I dated or how I handled myself in those relationships. I know my confusion around this was from my childhood hurts, but the trauma that bad relationships brought into my life was probably even worse than the trauma from childhood. And worse, even than that, I caused other people to suffer. So I'd completely change that if I had to heal in a year. Zip, done, goodbye. So that's my 10 things. And if you're in my courses, you've done this type of exercise before, because I'm all about how good it feels to face the truth, even when you thought it would be terrible, and then to take really practical steps to make changes. So you deserve those changes. You deserve a good life. If you want to write your 10 things down, I made the worksheet and I put the link below where you can download it. I'm not checking your homework. This is just so you can try this exercise and see if it inspires you and helps you make a map of and dream big about your next steps. It's not a crazy goal to change your life in a year. Some parts of your healing are going to take longer, of course. But if you're ready and you're willing to do what it takes, jump in. There's so much that can start feeling better quickly. You probably already know what to do. And if sticking with your resolutions or your intentions to change is hard for you, one thing you can do is get support. One way you can do that is to become a member of Crappy Childhood Fairy. Membership is the inner circle, and you get access to all my courses, my monthly webinars, the group coaching calls I lead twice a week that are just for members, and an incredible group of fellow travelers, people, men and women who take part in our secret Facebook group, supporting each other, organizing daily practice calls at different times throughout the day, just enjoying friendship with people who understand what it's like to have CPTSD and who are walking the same positive path of healing that you are. So you don't have to accomplish everything you write on your list of 10 things that you would do if you had only a year to heal. But doing the exercise might energize you to stay on the good path and open your mind to what's really possible for you. Everything is possible for you. Childhood trauma is a thief of your mental focus, your confidence, your energy, your love. But you deserve to recover those things. They're yours. Recover what is yours. Be bold and become your full and real self at last. You're beautiful. You are real. Don't let anybody tell you that it has to take forever for you to become fully real and fully beautiful as you were meant to be. You were born for this. You're made to heal. This is your birthright, and you've already come this far. So be proud of yourself. I love you, and I'm so proud of all you have done to recover and bring your love and your light to this world. We need you, and we're on this path together. I've learned a lot about healing past trauma by observing people who are trying to change their lives and watching who moves forward and transforms their personalities and their relationships and their material success in the world, and then watching who does not. And I got to meet a lot of people who were working on themselves because I was in 12-step rooms for decades. And I had periods where I was willing to go to any lengths. I was doing all the work. And then I had these other times where I really didn't do it. I couldn't do it. I didn't have it in me. I would shrink from it. And I would just sort of go along and talk the right talk, but, just do the least amount of work. In my case, it was usually because I was into some relationship that wasn't really compatible with my healing. It was dragging me down, or because I just wanted people to think I had it all together. So I made excuses for the problems I was having, all the conflicts with people, all the financial problems, all the relationship chaos. So if you're not moving forward, I know what that's like. But then I did move forward, and that's what I teach here for anyone who's ready to face the problems honestly and see where they might be resisting what's right, what's in their best interest to make their lives better. So I want to share with you a list of 6 excuses that I hear all the time that I've made myself. And excuses, they're like cement shoes, okay? So if you recognize them, you know there's a big opportunity for you to get free and heal and change your life. You don't want these cement shoes anymore, right? Number 1, the first one is what I call kicking the can down the road. I first need to do X, then I'll do Y. And it's an artificial sequence, right? Often people will put giant projects between where they are now and where they want their life to be. Like, I'll start eating healthy once things stop being so stressful. I'll do it then. It'll get better then. I'll leave this terrible relationship once I get my sanity back. I hear that a lot. That's a really dangerous fallacy. You're actually not going to get more sane in a terrible relationship. You're going to get ground down. So it's going to be much more difficult for you to leave the longer you stay. You'll often see people sabotaging their goals with some foolish action, something that really sets them back. Like they want to go back to school, but then they go into debt and then they can't afford to go to school. Or they want to get into a relationship, but then they hook up with some crappy ex and get all emotionally like wrecked about it. Or spend 6 months kind of, emotionally latched onto this thing that's not going anywhere. They're not going to get into that great relationship they were hoping for, not in that year. The second one is what I call getting on a high horse, where you're thinking, you know what, I'm not like all those shallow normies. Like I have to suffer. And you get this like with, I'm an artist, or I can't be expected to work full time, or I can't really care for my responsibilities because I'm just so, hurt or so creative. It's a superiority over other things. High horses, nobody likes them and they don't help you solve your trauma. The third one is the straw man. Do you know what a straw man is? It's like this artificial entity where you can put all the blame and you go, well, I can't change because this situation is completely holding me back. But it's kind of a fake thing, right? Or it's something where you're sort of constructing it as this big obstacle, but the obstacle may not be as big as you think. So this would be something like, the problem is with the system. It's rigged against people like me. It's capitalism, it's patriarchy, it's the diet culture. People are idiots and they have this religion or this political view and so on. But staying stuck and blaming it entirely on outside entities and people it's an excuse. It's an excuse to not change. And it'd be so great if you could honestly say that change was impossible because of this issue, or that the group of people make it impossible for you, because then all you'd have to do is get them to change and you'd be fine. But that's not how it is. A, they're not going to change. And B, even if they did, you would still have your sort of trauma symptoms. You'd still have the things inside that are limiting you. So you might not ever be rich. You might not ever have a career of your dreams. But I guarantee you, if you can face and work on what is holding you back in here and in here, you can change. People can make positive transformations under all kinds of circumstances. They do that when they're poor. They do it when they're incarcerated. They do it when they have to live in hiding. Yes, there are huge obstacles and disadvantages, and life is not fair. But every person, including you, is capable of great things based on where you are right now. For each of us, the job is finding how, in the environment in which we find ourselves, with the strengths and the weaknesses that we have, with the cards we've been dealt, what can we strive for? Can we move forward? Because we can. We can blossom despite everything. All right, the fourth one I call collapsing. I give up. I can't do things like this job, or this conversation, or this obligation, or this relationship, where I promised someone I'd help them, but now I'm tired. Tiredness is a huge form of collapse. And as you know, tiredness has a lot to do with choices that you make. And yes, I know some people have health conditions, chronic fatigue, or cancer, or long COVID, or even worse things. And that's another story, right? That's not what I'm talking about. Even when you have illnesses like that, it still requires taking care of yourself and maximizing your energy to the best of your ability. So there's no scenario where people with CPTSD really can get away with trashing their bodies and sacrificing their energy and their motivation. It hits us harder than people who didn't have huge trauma. We can prevent a lot of the health risks that are correlated with trauma, but it means really, really taking care of ourselves. Sleep, healthy food, and exercise. Those are the basic building blocks. If you're doing those things, you don't have to be perfect, but if you can do them at 80%, wow, then you can get to work on the emotional reasons that you sometimes collapse. When you have that together, you can start to look at the outside reasons you sometimes collapse. But it's got to start in here. People who are quite ground down inside are not in a good position to change the world or change other people or make things better. It starts here. So maybe you were trying to put yourself out there and it brought up a lot of fear. Or maybe you're really vulnerable to criticism and you don't have the kind of friends who help you keep criticism in perspective. It's cool. It's just one person. It's okay. I get that. Maybe you let problems pile up and it's too hard to face the mountain of problems. But there's a way forward, and it's not through escaping into substances or the internet or anger or isolation. It's a day-by-day process of showing up, doing the good things that keep you feeling okay, doing the work to keep a community of supportive people around you. I know it's easier said than done, but it's doable. And using the tools that help you do all that one day at a time. 12-step groups. You can use my daily practice. It's a free set of techniques. Saved my life. I teach it to everybody. It's a free course. It's down in the description section under every video I make. It's on the free tools page of my website. Please go find it. Check it out. You can come to free calls with me once you've signed up. We do the techniques together. I answer questions. It's a great way we can meet each other. You can also join my membership if you want. But if you're trying to change these behaviors where you're making excuses for changing your life, these are the areas where you might be getting bogged down. Okay, the next one is magical thinking. This is where you decide to believe that some bad situation you've created in your life, it's just happening to you. Bad things do just happen sometimes, but I'm talking about the things you actually chose, which becomes especially clear if the same bad thing happens again and again. Have you been there? I have. The abusive work environment, the emotionally avoidant partner, for example. Your trauma may be driving you to these patterns, but the pattern isn't going to change until you change it. So try to notice if you're making excuses for your patterns. What you hear people saying is, I'm just unlucky, or I'm cursed. I used to say that. I really thought it too. I'm like, I'm cursed. You know, everything I touch just turns to crap. I saw later it was me. Or you believe that the problem is that you attract people who hurt you, you know, narcissists, manipulative people. The problem isn't actually who is attracted to you, it's who you are attracted to. It's who you let into your life, who you get into a relationship with. When you can't detect who somebody is, or you get in so fast that you don't realize till too late what they're like, that was you. That was you, okay? And you take your power back when you admit, I keep being attracted to narcissists versus they just find me. I don't know why. All right, the next one is what I call fatalism. Fatalism is when you believe that something has to be that way. It's inevitable. And in traumatized people, it shows up as, my parents abandoned me, so I always end up with people who abandon me. And yes, it's absolutely true that the pattern of childhood tends to show up as your pattern in adult relationships, tends to, but you can change that. It's not inevitable. It's actually, when you have perspective on it and you've been working on it, you can see every time where you ignored the red flag and you walked right in anyway. There's this little moment where you can change how you do that. You actually have the power to do that. So watch out when you explain your problems this way, as if there's a direct cause and effect that you play no role in. My parents made me like this. I'm like this. I'm a highly sensitive person. I'm an empath. And even calling yourself an adult child of an alcoholic, all of that, the labeling of yourself, it's just a way of sort of giving up on all your potential to be different, to be not so affected by what happened to you as you are right now. You have that potential. You're a fully feeling, fully capable human being. You're working to heal the effects of the past and become yourself. What happened to you is not your identity. When you keep focusing on that identity, those abusive events or the neglect, it's a distraction. You know, believing that is distracting you. It's a coping mechanism that's making it so you don't have to focus on the problems right in front of you. The way you might be isolating and avoiding your own life. The way you might not be taking responsibility, or you're pushing people away with emotions you haven't yet learned to regulate. Or you're living as if somebody is somehow coming to save you. That's really common. You need to save you. I know it's sad, but it's true. You need to save you. And you can do that by facing the problems and looking for the parts of those problems where your own trauma-driven thinking or dysfunctional choices have played a part. You can focus on those, not because you're bad, but because this is the only part of life where you really do have power in yourself in present time. Okay, the last big excuse, it's really a whole category of excuses, and it's what's known as spiritual bypass. And the people who do this are sometimes religious, they're sometimes spiritual, sometimes they're against religion and spirituality, or their ideology is a religion. You know, it could be like a political belief, but they get so locked in that they cannot see reality. And this is stuff like, I'm exactly where I need to be right now. It's all good. Or if it's meant to be, it'll happen. Or God doesn't give you more than you can handle. I particularly hate that one because I've lost people to suicide, so it's just patently true. Well, I don't think God gives you those circumstances, but people frequently end up with things they can't handle. That happens. So I consider that a spiritual bypass. A lot of spiritual bypass, what it really is encouraging words that are meant to lift you up and keep you going when things are tough, but they can be used to pretend that you have no agency. They can be used to just make an excuse, I just can't do anything about this. Any belief system can be used by you or people who want to exploit you to put up with crap. So doctors who tell you your trauma symptoms are all imagined, that's a belief system of theirs. Therapists who tell you that the fact you're still miserable after 2 years is because you just need to feel your feelings or grieve or whatever, and you're like, I don't know, I've been crying every day for years. That's a spiritual bypass. That's not dealing with the reality of the situation. You need and deserve to feel happier, to feel more ease and comfort right now. So don't BS around with other people's excuses and don't make your own. Healing is possible when you can recognize your own symptoms and then work on ways to soften them. When you can recognize your own self-defeating behaviors and work on ways to change them. You don't have to do it all at once. Sometimes you just pick the one that's causing the most problems for you and start there. So many things that we've been told about healing our lives and recovering from old traumas is wrong. Have you noticed this? The wisdom a person needs to live a good life, to grow past the bad things that happened. I know people knew this at one time, but it's like it got broken up into pieces and tossed up with a lot of other ideas. And I started figuring this out years ago when I used to go to a lot of 12-step meetings. And I went to thousands of them over the years, and sometimes the same meeting every week for years. I'd just go. I would see the same people over and over again. And I had the opportunity not only to work on myself, but to observe other people who were making incredible progress. They were totally changing their lives like before my eyes, and they were shedding old problems, and it was really attractive. And these people were, a really positive influence on me. But I also had the chance to observe people who didn't make any progress. And this really shaped me too, and in fact formed my whole philosophy about how to heal and change your life and how you maybe don't want to approach it. Because you'll notice not a lot of people succeed at healing their trauma. It's not like an automatic given. And a lot of people reach out for help, but it's rare that anybody really breaks through, like really blossoms. It's a huge deal when someone does. And back when I was really struggling with what I now know were childhood PTSD symptoms, I was scared that I'd end up stuck like so many people in the meetings I went to. But I was determined to find a way to do it, to be one of the people who heals and changes. And so I was paying attention and taking notes. And I sought mentorship, not just in 12-step, but in like a few different disciplines. And so when you come to my channel, you'll notice that how I approach healing is something different than what's out there. I'm very direct. I teach people to be honest with themselves, self-directed, have sovereignty over their healing. And I bring in a lot of common sense wisdom, but I'm also very countercultural when you hold up my philosophy, and it is a distinct philosophy along with a set of techniques. But when you hold up my approach against the mainstream mental health world and their approach and their beliefs about what trauma is and how to heal it, well, there's differences, and I want to talk about those differences. Now, I have an open mind to the fact that different people respond to different things, but I think there are some really negative and limiting and even destructive ideas out there. And just in case those ideas are all you ever got and you're feeling hopeless or stuck, like healing can't happen for you, I want to present an alternative that might help you get a breakthrough. Now, I love doing this work because all day I'm witnessing and communicating with people who are getting that breakthrough. And I feel strongly that everyone deserves this chance to heal from their trauma. And I'm very driven by this mission. And I've always been interested in how people who are struggling with depression and trauma can heal and make positive changes. It was so hard to get real information about that for me when I needed it. But I had that breakthrough, and the healing work it's a lifelong project. It's a happy project, but I'm never done. I don't think anyone ever is. It's something we're always working on. We're always, it's kind of like a condition that you maintain. And I'm unfolding as a person, just like you are, just like everybody is. So I have complex PTSD. And now that I know what it is, I can see that I've always had it. I had a rough childhood. I've talked about it in my courses and on my videos. It was mostly because my mother had severe alcoholism, and that brought in all the problems that go with alcoholism. And I'd say the CPTSD symptoms, I first remember them when my mom moved us to a new state when I was 9, away from my father, and I lost him, and I lost my support system. So I was isolated. And it got worse in my teens when I started having sex. And it's common for kids who were abused to sort of fall apart at that point in their lives. And then I got my heart broken. Then I got my heart broken a whole bunch. And then I really got my heart broken in my late 20s. And at about the same time, I was a victim of a violent crime. And also in the same couple of weeks, my mother died. So I was effed up. I was not just sad, I was scared, I was freaked out. And that's when it became obvious that something was really wrong with me. And there was no name for it. And it also became obvious that doing normal mainstream therapy not only wasn't helping me, but it had never helped. And in fact, I think it was kind of making it worse. So I thought I was some kind of really extra screwed up person. I was convinced that my therapist was judging me, like for being so unresponsive to things that were helpful to people in normal cases. And they definitely didn't know what was wrong with me or what to do, but they thought they knew what to do. And they didn't really address the self-defeating behaviors that were all over my life and creating an extra load of trauma and drama. Like 80% of my trauma at that point was self-created stuff. There was the childhood that led me to the self-defeating behavior, but those behaviors were then really bogging me down. So yeah, my therapist had me talking about my feelings, about my memories, and it was literally making my symptoms worse and worse. Now, to be fair, therapists back then didn't know what was wrong because there was no name for it. And the name we now know, it's complex PTSD, and that's the kind that comes from chronic exposure to intense stress, usually in childhood. Doesn't have to be, it could be at other times in a person's life. And it seems obvious now, if you know what it is and you've had a chance to check that knowledge with your experience of struggles and healing from what happened to you. But even now, most mental health professionals don't have a working knowledge of complex PTSD. A lot of people, doctors, therapists, mental health programs, they say that they're trauma-informed, but that's really a subjective term. And, what do they mean by that? You have to ask. And what do they propose that a person does if they have CPTSD or trauma? So you'll notice there's a lot more talk about the problem of trauma than the solution to it. How do you actually heal? And that's what my life's work has become. So I hit the end of the road and I was hopeless about all avenues of help available to me. This was back 29 years ago now. And then something happened and I healed. Not overnight, of course, but in bursts. And I had a big burst of healing when I first found the techniques that I still use every day. I've been using them ever since I was first shown. And that's the daily practice. That is a set of techniques. I teach them for free. It's a free course. It's always down in the description section below every video I make. So you can always access that. And I'd love it if you did. If you take the course, you can come join me on free Zoom calls that I lead every couple weeks. So I'd love to meet you there. I answer questions. We use the techniques together. And you can see if they help you as much as they help me to calm your CPTSD symptoms. But back then there was a core hole in my spirit that got healed all at once in a short amount of time. And I had a lot to work out after that, big problems in my life. And I'm still not perfect or perfectly healed, but I don't get into trauma-driven problems like I used to. And when I hit trouble, I know what to do. And that's what I teach here and in my courses and workshops and coaching, an alternative self-led path to healing that can help whether you have access to professional help or not. Now, in some ways, it's a radical approach Now that I'm writing a book about it, and I realize how much all the videos here are like, well, they're like a sea urchin. They're like little spikes of information. I'm putting out, like, one video is a spike, and here, and I talk about this and this. And so now writing the book demands that I be linear and that I weave my lessons around a coherent philosophy, which I've known for years. I know my philosophy, but I don't think I've ever articulated it all at once. My philosophy informs every video I make. And so I want to have it all laid out in one place and in one video, and this is it. Are you ready? Okay. I have 8 principles, and the first one is trauma is an injury, not an identity. So we used to think of symptoms of trauma as primarily psychological, right? We now know that they're largely neurological. And by extension, they're physiological, because neurological means nervous system, and your nervous system not only governs, your nerves, your brain, it governs your whole body. And it affects your emotions, it affects your hormones, your immune system, your sensations when you feel like it's time to go to sleep. Like, it governs your physical life. And so when you have a neurological injury, which is what trauma is, it can affect everything in your body. And that explains what we now know, that a history of early trauma can really increase your risk, not your certainty, but your risk of serious health problems. Not just the things that we've always kind of known, like depression, anxiety, bad relationships. We've known that. But it can also give you heart attacks, strokes, diabetes, obesity, reproductive disorders, endocrine disorders, immune disorders, learning disabilities, problems with memory, an increased risk of dementia. Ooh, that one scares me. So there's almost like no bad thing on earth in people that isn't made worse by trauma. So we have every incentive to heal. Okay, so also part of this injury is that adult symptoms of childhood abuse and neglect ruin lives. They ruin careers, like so many careers. They ruin relationships, and they ruin families. The effects of trauma, we kind of knew this instinctively, but when you really measure it out, if you look at people who are incarcerated, there's such a high rate of traumatized people in there. If you look at people with addictions, if you look at people with grave mental health disorders, all of it is made so much worse by trauma. So that's starting to be finally dealt with. As a person with CPTSD, I can sort of say, we're the most expensive people in the healthcare system. And so there's an incentive not just for us, but for the whole system to find a better way to help us. I don't think they've done it yet. They talk about it, they're not there yet, but that's what we're doing here, is practical ways to start bringing those symptoms down. And I can definitely say my health improved dramatically 29 years ago. I feel healthier, more energetic, more alert than I did at that age. And it's thanks to being able to re-regulate my thinking, my nervous system, to bring my vital signs kind of back into alignment through using my tools. I use my tools, and that's, again, my daily practice. You can learn that too. The effects of early trauma are more serious than they realized, and they're more wide-ranging. And it's not just the obvious stuff. And CPTSD, it can't be cured, but the symptoms can be healed. And I do think of it something like diabetes, where you may have it, but you can reverse your symptoms by changing how you do your day, what you eat, what medicine you take. For us, there also is a way of living that can help turn those symptoms back around. And if you do that, you can have continued good health and keep going. And then if you sort of fall apart, the symptoms come back. So that's how I experience CPTSD. And if it were to get worse, especially as we get older, if it were to get worse, the symptoms could become more grave. So I just want to emphasize, it's so important. It's so important to address your symptoms. You may not know what caused your symptoms. You may never know, and that will be okay if you can learn to calm your symptoms. All right, the second principle, dysregulation is an almost universal symptom among traumatized people. People don't talk about this. You may have never been told. But neurological dysregulation, it's a nervous system phenomenon. It can be measured in the brain. It can be measured in your vital signs. And easily observable signs that you might notice are things like difficulty focusing, your heartbeat being irregular, going up randomly or just too high, feeling clumsy, feeling emotionally overwhelmed, or once you've gotten emotionally overwhelmed and maybe, expressed anger that was kind of over the top, then going emotionally flat, like you feel nothing. And even your thinking will be like, I don't care. And there's this weird silence after intense outbursts. Well, that could be neurological dysregulation if you relate to that. Now, everyone is sometimes dysregulated, and most people will eventually re-regulate, but dysregulation seems to be exacerbated by traumatic experiences, and the brain changes that as a result. And so people with CPTSD will get dysregulated more often, more intensely, and they'll have a harder time coming back out of dysregulation. So luckily that can be healed. But dysregulation is responsible for, a wide range of the symptoms that we associate with trauma. Like, why does trauma cause people to have a higher probability of getting lupus or MS? Why does having a history of trauma make it so hard to heal tissue? Like, I got stuck in the hospital once for over a month. I could not heal. And it was at an extremely traumatic time in my life. And I had surgery after surgery after surgery. And they kept saying, we don't know why, but you're, just everything keeps breaking down after we operate. And then I got back, I had left my daily practice techniques, and then I came back to them. I just came back and started really working on calming. I didn't know what dysregulation was at the time. I didn't know what CPTSD was. I just knew that I was really freaked out again. And I pulled it way back using my techniques, and then I healed. Then my body healed. And so I've had physicians tell me, physicians who know what trauma is, yeah, probably I was somaticizing my trauma, which means sort of expressing it physically, like the trauma plays out with limited blood flow or, poor immune response to infection. I was having a lot of infections. I kept hemorrhaging, I was having all these problems. And then my body kind of pulled it together. And it pulled it together when I was addressing my trauma symptoms. So again, I did not know that was trauma, but later I looked back and it's like, that's what it was. My daily practice that I was using the whole time. It was calming my symptoms. And the effect when I'm using my tools consistently is always like an improvement in my physical well-being and my mental focus. So dysregulation also has cognitive elements. There's emotional disruption, and I would say emotional, developmental delays. And so there's this damage or delay to our ability to connect with other people, our ability to kind of read the room and sense what other people are feeling, how to face up when things are awkward, and how to apologize, or how to ask someone out. All that stuff, it can get delayed because trauma is it's doing something with the neurological injury that's a little hard to connect. That's what it feels like to me. And it's consistent with some of the research that I've seen. Now, self-defeating behaviors that result directly from dysregulation and from the injury of trauma. Self-defeating behavior, I feel like, does not get addressed adequately. And I don't know, I saw something like 11 therapists, and they were always very ready to talk about what my mom had done, what the suffering was in my life. But in terms of the mistakes that I was actively making that were making my life terrible and driving people away, I had a harder time getting help. And I don't know if they didn't understand or relate, or if they were trying to go easy on me. They thought it would be too distressing for me to be confronted or criticized about stuff that I was doing to mess up my life. And I ended up, what I ended up learning, my daily practice, as well as, getting some, a big truth bomb in my face, was from a woman who was a peer who showed me the daily practice. And she was just like, yeah, you have to stop hurting people. You have to stop being selfish. And I was like, what? Nobody had ever told me that. There was a lot of talk about how other people had been bad, but just it never came back to me. And I was so ready, because the beautiful thing, when you realize it was you who was making a lot of the mistakes, it was you who was being rude, selfish, using people socially. Yeah, I had a lot of stuff going on. But when you know it's you, it's like, guess what? It's something you can change. Now, what my mom did, I couldn't change. My mom died before all this, she died at the beginning of my healing process. Not a coincidence. I started healing as a result of all the pain that was in my life at that time. And that's when I could begin to get honest with myself about the role my self-defeating behaviors played. Some of the attitudes I had were social or cultural, and some of it I learned from my mom. I grew up, part of the time my childhood was in a commune. It was very crazy, druggy, people having sex on the floor, that kind of thing. And, it wasn't exactly a great moral education for me. And it's not like I didn't learn anything about like a good way of life or what was a way to be a good person. There's a lot of ways to pick that up. A little bit from my parents, from some good teachers, friends' parents, TV, good old TV, Where would we be without it? Like, how should I act? What is a good person? So I learned all of that, but a lot of my suffering and a lot of the ways I was doing self-defeating behavior was from cultural messages like, hey, I have to be authentic. I have to be myself. I have needs. I was just kind of like taking those things a little too far. I didn't know any better. So these three, which is dysregulation, disconnection, and self-defeating behavior, they flow into each other and they make each other worse. They can also make each other better, but when your trauma symptoms are getting the better of you, it's usually like a ping pong between those 3 points: dysregulation, disconnection, and self-defeating behavior. Now, all three of those things, there's one thing that activates them, and it's triggers. So learning to calm triggers, and this is the fourth principle, learning to calm your triggers is the starting place to break the cycle. If you can calm your triggers, an ordinary, natural healing process can follow. If you've been trying to heal and trying to heal and trying to heal, and you keep, you get 2 steps forward and then 10 steps back, it's probably that your triggers haven't been addressed. And these days, people say triggered, it can refer to anything really, like something you don't like or you disagree with. But when we're talking about triggers in the context of trauma, we mean something that sets off the neurological dysregulation. A stimulus happens, and for reasons you can't totally understand or control, a nervous system reaction kicks in. Your heart's pounding, your thinking gets distorted. Really, if you do a brain scan, left front cortex is going down, less activity. Right front cortex is your emotional center. It's going up. What's going down over here is reasoning. So less reasoning, more emotion. That's what it feels like to be triggered. The way people talk about triggers, it's as if it's other people's problem that they do it. But what the problem is that we react to stimulus that way. That's the problem. You can learn to calm it. And it's a lot more productive to learn to calm your reaction to things that trigger your neurological dysregulation, way more productive than trying to get other people to stop being themselves. People are going to people, right? Stuff is going to happen. People are going to overlook you. They're going to criticize you. They're going to reject you. This is always going to be part of life. They're going to not get you. They're going to team up with each other and leave you out. All that stuff, that's hard for a person with CPTSD. But when you learn to calm your triggers, it can't set off that boom, dysregulation, disconnection, self-defeating behavior. So you can practice this and you can strengthen yourself. Practiced and strengthened against triggers. Now, calming can largely be accomplished through simple techniques that you manage yourself. You don't necessarily need to see a professional for this. These are things that many generations for thousands of years have known about how to start calming down the nervous system. And if you ask me, it should be the first line of treatment. And it includes things like intense exercise, doing something that involves the left side of the body and the right side of the body, like marching. And actually, when you do one of these exercises with other people, it magnifies the beneficial effect. And so that's interesting, right? For thousands of years, soldiers have marched. And then they also will sing or chant together, hut, hut. And doing that together with other people, the voice, the body, it's how people re-regulate. Nobody maybe knew that's exactly what was going on, but people have figured this out. And I think that if people are fighting in a battle, you bet they're triggered. Their trauma is activated. It's going on right now. And so it's only practical that they learned how to sort of bring their nervous system back into line so that they could manage their bodies and their body systems and pay attention and sleep at night. All of those things are critical for anything intense like battle, right? And so we can learn from that how people did that. Singing together is re-regulating. And then sometimes a little shock to your senses. It could be like a cold shower or warm hand washing, something that reminds you of your senses. You plunk down in a chair. I have a sheet, and I'll remember to put this down in the description section below. It's a sheet about the 10 emergency measures you can use to re-regulate yourself. Very good to keep handy, carry it with you. So those are the emergency measures. And then the ongoing measure for re-regulation that I teach is the daily practice. And that's always down below too. So I recommend that for everybody, whether or not you have access to professional help. This lack of awareness or focus or solutions for treating dysregulation is why conventional methods have been so minimally successful to treat complex PTSD. There is poor evidence of good efficacy. It's marginal. And you know, a little bit you might even question it, because especially where drugs are involved, there's this incentive to hand select the studies that are included in, you know, the measurement of is it effective, and there's ways that you can really jigger the research to make it look like something's more effective than it is. But it's, you know, placebo, therapy, medication, they're all kind of close. And physical exercise, intense physical exercise, has recently been shown to be at least as effective as therapy or meds or both. And I just remember when I had acute PTSD, nobody told me that. They were ready to just slap me on some medication. And I didn't want to do that because I had had this powerful experience when I first got my daily practice of having my depression go away. But then something really bad happened, and I got into like adult onset PTSD symptoms, which had me looping and looping on the memory of the bad thing, and going into sort of like adrenal overdrive. My heart would pound. And I was getting worn down. It was going on for a year and a half, and I finally mentioned it to a doctor, and I had been in therapy for months at that time. They were like, oh, you got to get on medication. But I didn't want to, and I said, hold on, and I got online and I researched, and there were a few things that I could do that I thought I just wanted to try first, and it was intense exercise. So for 45 minutes, I would run, or I would like walk up a hill, something to get my heart going and get sweat going. I drank a lot of water. I stopped eating sugar or consuming alcohol, and guess what? My PTSD symptoms went way down, like most of the way. And sometimes if you can go from here to here with those symptoms, from here you've kind of got it. You can, you know, it's no longer getting the better of you, and you can start to manage better. And that's what happened for me. I did those simple interventions and didn't have to go on the medication. So talk therapy is largely focused on noticing feelings and recounting memories. And while this is counterintuitive, talking about your trauma can be a trigger for dysregulation. And when you're dysregulated, you can't really process emotions or memories. Even if you had some sort of breakthrough, you would have a hard time remembering what happened during your therapy session. And that's what happened to me. I would just I remember thinking, oh, this is kind of good. But there would be between sessions, I would just regress. I would just go right back. But it became very clear to me that talking about trauma was dysregulating to the point that it was counterproductive. Now, I recognize everybody needs at some point to talk about what happened, especially, maybe right after it happened, or as you're trying to figure out, or before you've ever gotten validation that, yeah, that's a trauma, that's really hard, you deserve care about that, you should have had something better. So we all need that. There's a brain pathway when you talk about trauma that can set off the whole neurological dysregulation. James Pennebaker, University of Texas at Austin, has written about this. He's done a lot of research on it. Writing about, harsh things that happen in trauma is a way that you can get it out without having to re-trigger the language center of your brain, which is where, for whatever reason, it goes off. It's a calmer way to get it out. And when I've written something like that, I can then read it to somebody. And that's what my friend showed me. She was like, write your fears and resentments. This is a specific technique. So don't just go off what I'm saying in this video. Take the free course if you want to try it. But you write the distressing thoughts, and then you meditate, and then you read to somebody what they are. And that is a way that I can share with another person and get support if I want it about what happened without talking about it. But that really changes the game. And this is where my principles kick in. If you become a member and you join our secret Facebook group, we have one of our guidelines is go lightly with talking about what happened to you. We understand, but a lot of people's first instinct when they get into a healing community is, I just want to tell you what happened to me. And I understand that instinct, and it's what we were conditioned to do. It's what we were told would make us feel better. And if it does make you feel better, by all means, go do that, but not in our community. We're doing something, we can touch on it. You can say, well, I was abused as a kid. There was physical abuse. There was sexual abuse. You need not go into detail with us, because most of us understand. And that way you're communicating what happened, and then what everybody's helping each other with is, and so today what I'm struggling with is trust, or expressing myself, or setting boundaries, normal problems that people with a traumatic past have. And in that we can talk and support each other and use tools together. And having a community of people to help you is very powerful. Now, I'm still talking about the problem with conventional treatment, and I just want to say medication. Medication can interfere with the natural inclination that people have to re-regulate when they get dysregulated. Everybody gets dysregulated sometimes. Most people eventually re-regulate. And what we do in my programs is we keep practicing that muscle of learning. Okay, there's my dysregulation symptoms, the cue, the thing I notice, it's happening. And then we use tools, we come back into re-regulation as quickly as possible. So the goal is like to be regulated as much as possible, more, most of the time. Totally changes what happens in your life if you're regulated most of the time. A lot of things that you couldn't previously do, whatever it is for you, be at a party and act like yourself, have a relationship, try for a new job. Everybody has different thresholds of what they can do before they get dysregulated. Well, if you can stay regulated more of the time, the world is your oyster. You can do so many things. Because it's like, I'm kind of, I'm on a date, I'm getting really anxious. You can just go into the bathroom, use your tools, come back out. Nobody's the wiser that you were in there writing and, washing your hands in warm water to get your nervous system back online and grounded again. And go back out there and be yourself again. Like there's this huge flexibility. You could also work with a professional or a therapist, on something if you know how to regulate. And there are therapists who know about that. I think a lot of the tools that people teach for re-regulation, when they're tools that are espoused or created by people who don't have CPTSD, they're not powerful enough. That's all I'm saying, And so I pay particular attention to people who themselves have CPTSD to learn from. Medication, though, it's very imprecise for treating trauma. It has its applications for different mental health situations, but for complex PTSD, there's very low evidence that it helps, like, anti-anxiety drugs and antidepressants. There's a reason why they give those things, but for CPTSD, it just doesn't do that much. We haven't found something that really hits that spot. The problem is that your natural ability to re-regulate and to work on that, I can just tell, like a lot of times when I'm working with coaching clients, and they keep using the tools and they keep using the tools and they just can't get back. And I'm like, are you medicated by chance? And sometimes it's like weed or alcohol even. It could be that, but also prescribed drugs and, psychotropic drugs that are given can make it more difficult to re-regulate. Now, some people, they really can't stop taking. And I would not recommend that anybody just kind of make their own decision to get off. It has to be done with a doctor if that's your choice to do. And whether you do or don't take them, you can still use these tools, but if you're having trouble getting that breakthrough and getting back into a state of regulation, which you'll know when you feel it, it has a very pleasant feeling to it of like alert, calm, attentive. But if you can't get there, it could be that medication is interfering, and that's a longer term process. But I'm just saying there's a better way, okay? So the standard therapeutic modes of when you go talk about what happened, talk about your traumatic stories, feel your feelings. If it's more likely to produce dysregulation than healing, we have a problem. Most insurance plans, they'll say, okay, you can go talk to a therapist 10 times. And it's like, you talk about your trauma, you're crying. And it would appear that you're not getting anywhere. Then they go, well, you better take medication. Now you just may have been cut off from the ability to get back your ability to re-regulate. To start working on that. So I feel that the system is broken. The system is misguided. It's not everybody in the system, but it is like the baseline of the system. And so as you're trying to get help for yourself, I just really encourage you to ask questions, do research, read, be willing to try things, experiment with them, but also listen to yourself. And if it doesn't give you a feeling like you're doing better, there should be a feeling of relief, like very quickly. Don't let anybody tell you, oh, this is going to take a long time. And you're like, I don't know, I'm just really going down. Yes, don't listen to that. It has to feel better. Maybe you can do deeper work that feels terrible to look at when you can stay regulated, but I would prioritize being able to stay regulated. Now, standard professional help cannot be relied upon to be the answer. It's cost prohibitive. It's wildly, not standardized, and it's also unproven. And people don't really talk about this, but studies show that when it comes to like how people are diagnosed, there's a lot of variation depending on who the practitioner is. when it comes to how people are treated, there's so much variation that researchers have concluded it's almost meaningless. So what I encourage you to look at is, what are your symptoms? People are always saying, well, I don't know, my childhood wasn't that bad, but I have all the symptoms. Can I come to your channel? Can I take your course? And I'm like, yes, we are about symptoms here. This like direct cause and effect, like my mom did this, therefore I have this. It's not true for everybody. Look at your siblings, right? Different kids in the same family have really different outcomes. Everybody's different. If you have these symptoms of dysregulation, then yes, use my techniques. If you're trying to get your life together because self-defeating behavior has gotten the better of you and you need to empower yourself to make a change, yes, these programs are for you. So, okay, next principle. Conventional beliefs about trauma have disempowered survivors. The power to heal exists in present time. I insist, the power to heal is in present time. And the only aspect of trauma that can be controlled is our own symptoms and what we do about them. Now, if you're actively in a situation that's traumatizing you, okay, yes, other people are involved. But this old therapeutic model urges us to give all the power away about that change by focusing on the past, on talking about things and relying on professionals to solve everything. And you know what? You get 1 hour a week with a professional, and really, have you ever felt like that was enough? And I just think professionals are perfect for advising, helping, guiding you between days where you've got your own tools, you're working on your own process. And I do think that that is so important. I get told from time to time, like there's thousands of therapists and doctors who refer their clients to Crappy Childhood Fairy and to take my courses, and they come themselves and they get coached. Like, this is for everybody. But there's a few professionals who find it very threatening that what we're doing is like self-empowering. We're teaching each other as peers, we're helping each other, we're serving as a community to each other. We're defining what it's like to have CPTSD, and we're helping each other understand what it is. And we're reading all the books that some of them are not reading, frankly. Nobody can read everything. And so we belong at the table talking about this. And we need to be focusing not only on the hurtful actions of others, but we need to be focusing on ourselves and assessing ourselves for the choices that we make that are perpetuating the harm of childhood trauma, both our own symptoms and then the way we treat other people. You know that saying, hurt people, and usually, people mean different things when they say that, but it's something we have to take very seriously. If we're not healing our trauma, we run the risk of hurting and traumatizing other people, certainly children, but also partners, coworkers, everybody in our path. Healing is so important. It's helping our health. It's helping the way we relate to other people. It's bringing about a sweetness in our lives. It's helping us earn the money we need to adequately support ourselves, which is really important. But because of this focus on the past, what happened, it's left generations of trauma survivors unhealed and locked into this identity as victims. And I understand, as a trauma survivor myself, yes, we are victims, in fact. What happened to us victimized us. Trauma is an injury, not an identity. And so it's just really proliferated in this generation, this identity. It's like, I'm a victim, that's all I am, you have to change so that I cannot be a victim. Well, it just never works. So even if that were fair, which sometimes it is, it's not going to happen. So if you're going to heal, if you're going to be an empowered person who makes a difference in the world in the way that you want to make a difference in the world, it's so important to heal your trauma, to learn to calm your triggers, to reduce the effect of triggers to make you dysregulated, disconnected, and in your self-defeating behavior. So the seventh principle is that healing complex PTSD requires taking your power back. That's your agency. Do you know that word, agency? It's your ability to lead your own life, to make changes, to affect the world. Now, once you own your healing, you no longer have to depend on fallible people and the healthcare system wherever you may live and the methods available to you. They may not be enough for you. You are less inclined when you're empowered like that to settle for stock answers that don't fit. Like the one that I'm always complaining about is how I got told, gosh, you keep making these, destructive choices, my self-defeating behavior. You must want to recreate your childhood. And I just always knew, like, no, I don't. I want desperately to have a better life, and I don't understand how I keep getting into this rut, and it's, now I know, it's neurological dysregulation. My brain was down, my feelings were up, I was making impulsive choices, and I couldn't understand how I got there. I was having trouble reading the situation. I had an attachment wound that was pushing me into relationships quickly and making it hard to leave because of the abandonment trauma that would come up in there. So, like so many people with trauma, I was stuck with this idea, like, this isn't helping me, it must be me. It just must be that I'm a defective person. You're not defective. The trauma symptoms I'm describing here are totally normal for people who were abused and neglected in childhood. Now we know. And you are the best judge of what helps you. So it's very important to stay at the, in the driver's seat of what you're doing in your healing. Confidence in yourself happens, it grows, it develops through courageous experimentation and a focus on identifying and healing the symptoms that you notice in yourself, and then changing your approach to life or the behaviors that are sabotaging you. And you can do this, and it feels great. Like your self-esteem just goes when you make these changes and discover that you actually can. But it takes a shift of focus from the traditional way that people are viewing trauma. It's like, oh, it happened to you, talk about it, and then one day you'll feel better. That day just never came, not through that avenue. So though other people can support us, there's nobody else who can actually make the healing happen for us. Not therapists, not partners, not parents. So don't even wait for them to apologize. Parents almost never apologize. But even when they do, which is nice, it's not going to change that you now have a neurological injury. If you have CPTSD, the damage is there. It's in here now. And so to repair the relationship when that's possible is a lovely thing, but you still will have your symptoms until you learn to calm them. So that brings me to the 8th principle. And this is that character development is essential to healing. And in particular, character development is important for developing the ability to connect with other people. If you have difficulty with boundaries, if you tend to lash out, these are totally common symptoms, right? But they push people away. And so they harm your ability to connect. I've never met a person who has complex PTSD who didn't struggle in some of these ways to connect with other people. And the thing is, not only do you need some healing to have healthy connections with people, but you need some kind of connection with people to heal. And I always say, this is like, I was so sad when I realized this, because I would like to believe that everything in life I can do by myself. But I can't heal trauma by myself. It's a relational wound, and much of it is healed by practicing connecting with other people. So even if your ability to connect with other people is kind of like rickety and has ouchies in it, you just have to keep trying in a titrated way. I have this course called Connection Boot Camp you can take if you want to learn a system, a 30-day program to start practicing that. And then overall, I have a class called Healing Childhood PTSD, which is a great place to start. So most complex PTSD symptoms that we're experiencing today are caused not by the original trauma. And this is, I keep saying this, original trauma did it. We can't change that part. But that original trauma has led to some self-defeating behaviors, and those are causing us to re-traumatize ourselves. Now, it's still not your fault, especially when it's first happening, but I'm here sort of like ruining that innocence in you where you can say, I didn't know, because now you know. Your self-defeating behaviors are reactivating your trauma, are pushing people away. That, the loss of someone you love who rejects you, who breaks up with you or stops being friends with you, or you lose a job, like that's devastating to a person with CPTSD. It's hard for anybody, but that's why it's so important to learn these things, and why making a little change here and a little change there, it really starts to build so that you can maintain good relationships all around, or, start to improve them. It's a process, right? But you start to improve them, and then those good relationships give you more strength for the next move you're making in your healing. Character development is not taught in most dysfunctional homes. It's barely taught in schools, and most therapist offices don't teach it. You know, I have a friend who was getting a PhD as a therapist, and they learn ethics. And ethics, I said, well, what do you learn? And it was mainly like, don't sleep with your clients. And there was very, very limited, you can't give advice to people, and you can't just tell them, hey, stop sleeping with married men. That's what's great. Like Crappy Childhood Fairy, I can say, hey, stop doing it. It's going to make you miserable. It's morally wrong. It's going to make your life unhappy. It's going to gut your ability to have a good relationship. I'll just be in your face. But that's character development, discerning what's right, what's wrong. That's so important to your healing. And that's a lot of what we got robbed of growing up. If your parents were drunk, high, fighting all the time, mentally ill, absent, you didn't get that moral education on like, how do you be a fine, upstanding person? But you're not going to be happy until you are. Like everybody's coded with that desire. And trauma can kind of drive it out of you and make you kind of try to find other ways to get your needs met, but it will never work. You need to be a good person and you need to be yourself. Those are the two ingredients of being really fulfilled and really happy. And being fully yourself includes bringing your gifts to bear in the world. So there's a fear around addressing self-defeating behaviors because people confuse that with blaming the victim. And every time I talk about self-defeating behaviors, someone in the comments will go, you're just blaming the victim. You're just shaming people. But I'm not. Believe me, everybody's walking around feeling the shame anyway of what maybe they did wrong and a whole bunch of other stuff that they didn't do. Now, the 12-step model is one example of the centrality of moral reckoning in healing. The point of healing isn't just to feel better, but to become the person that you can be. And that is all about clearing up the mistakes that you've made, the way you've harmed others. Complex PTSD suppresses and oppresses your true nature. And you risk losing forever the opportunity to express who you are if you don't heal. So on a large scale, complex PTSD robs the entire world of the loving and talented and creative person you are, of the participation of so many people who are right now, repressed under their trauma. They cannot bring it right now. And we are all suffering as a result. When you look out at the world and you're like, something's missing, it should be better than this, we've got to make it a better world. Well, who's missing? Like about 7% of the population who is suppressed under trauma right now. Trauma is part of who we are. It's not going anywhere. It's going to be part of our story forever. But healing the symptoms allows us to simultaneously accept what happened and then to transcend it, to become who we were always meant to be, which now includes your greatness as well as your history, your trauma. So many, many great men and women have had traumatic pasts. Trauma hurt them, but it didn't define them. In fact, it informed them, it deepened them, and it empowered them to have compassion and to be motivated to make a difference in the world. Now, true happiness requires that we develop and use our gifts to bring to the world what we're capable of bringing. And then having done that, to create conditions where everybody has the opportunity to develop their gifts. That is a full and happy and meaningful life, and I hope you'll take it to heart. One of the most devastating ways the damage shows up from neglect and abuse in childhood is that we go through life either alone or in relationships where we're not loved, we're not safe, or we're not happy. And it's not supposed to be that way. If you have childhood PTSD and you're wondering why you keep attracting people who are either not functional, not into you, or outright hurtful to you, you're going to want to watch this video. With childhood PTSD, having relationships with the wrong kind of people is definitely one of the symptoms. That's how my childhood trauma manifested for me when I used to live my life stuck in a loop between alone and in a bad relationship, one or the other. And I'm making this video for those of you who are in that loop right now. And if you're actually in a good relationship, keep watching, because what I'm going to teach here can be applied to a lot of other aspects of life, like work and creativity and fulfilling the dreams and goals that you have, but that you haven't achieved yet. So basically, if you had trauma as a kid, romance is one big area
where you can end up with not just less than what you really want, but with something you never wanted. You try to meet someone you like, who's a solid person, someone you can trust, and even when you think you've found them, they let you down. They push you away, or they turn out to have some giant problem, like they're already in a relationship, or they have an addiction, or they just can't be there for you for one reason or another. And you wonder, why didn't you see it coming? If you're like a lot of people with childhood PTSD, it's not that clear how this blind spot happens. Everything seems so good. They said all the right things. There were promises made. Your heart is wide open to them, and you're feeling really good about the whole thing, and then bam, you find out how wrong you were. And the horrible truth is, a lot of us stay in those relationships if the other person doesn't leave us for no better reason than we just can't face the prospect of the breakup or of being single again. It's too triggering of old abandonment stuff. And so we hold on as long as we can, and whether it ends now or soon, we lose years of our lives this way. So if this is familiar to you and you're drained and you're confused, I want to tell you why this experience, this moment where you've just lost what you thought was a good relationship, is an incredible opportunity to heal. Not a tragedy, an opportunity. When you get pushed out of a relationship with the wrong person, whether you know it or not, you've just taken a big step closer to the right person. Because now your path is clear. And with some healing, the right person can find you. So if you're feeling ready for this good thing to happen, to meet up with the right person, I have some advice for you. The job in front of you is not to run out there and meet someone, not yet, but instead to raise the brightness of what I call your cab light. Cab light. Do you know this term? You know how a taxi cab has a light on top? And when the cab light's off, it means there's already a passenger in that cab. But when the light's on, hey, it's free. Well, this is a metaphor that refers to the vibe of someone who is ready and open to meet a really great new person. Cab light. Now, what happens when your cab light won't come on? Has this ever happened? You feel ready to meet someone, you're thinking about it all the time and maybe reaching out to people and putting in a lot of effort, but it's like no one can see you. You're not attracting interest, or you're attracting interest, but not the right kind, or not the right people. That's a broken cab light, by the way, where you're trying to meet someone, but the only ones noticing you aren't anyone who's safe or appropriate or available for you. And if you're feeling anxious to meet someone, it's tempting to just rush in and think, oh, well, I can make this work. Have you ever done that? Where you bond with that person and then realize who they actually are, and then spend the next 2 years trying to retrofit them into the person you hoped they were the first time you met. And you know how that ends. When your cab light's working properly and it comes on, good people show up in your life. People who are appropriate, wonderful, totally thrilled to be with you. So how do you make that happen? How can you get your cab light to shine brightly in just the right way to attract just the right person for you? I'm going to tell you. But let me first explain what may be standing in your way so far. If you grew up with trauma like abuse, abandonment, being demeaned, going hungry, not protected from danger, these hardships, even when they're over, can leave, traces all over your life. Wounds, blind spots, sensitivities, pockets of low self-esteem that leak out even when you're on your best behavior. So, for example, if your aim is to have a family, then you would only want to attract people with the same goal and who are capable of caring for kids and supporting life as a family. If you want to have a marriage, then you'd only want to attract a partner who could do that, who's free to marry you, as in not already married, and able and willing to make a lifetime commitment to you if things go well. So the question is, if you're not attracting those things, if you're getting entangled with the wrong kinds of people who can never be what you want or aren't even trying, what are you communicating about yourself that's leaving these needs of yours just dangling out there, unmet, unseen? If you're not attracting what you want, your cab light's not working. So you can think of a working cab light as the set of signs that you give off that a partner who's a good fit would be looking for when they meet you. Healthy people look for the signs of what they want, and they stay away from people who communicate something different than that. The people who don't really care what signals you're sending are the messed up people. People who aren't healed yet, or the people who are actually looking not for love, but for a quick fix relationship. And for them, the stakes are very low. They don't care. So if you're not clear who you are and what you're seeking, then your cab light can't communicate it for you. And in that case, you're going to get whoever you get, but not who you want. Now I'm simplifying it, but this in a nutshell is how we end up in empty and miserable relationships, blaming the other person. But really the problem began because we were carrying around enough trauma that we just couldn't shine a light that could attract the kind of person we wanted. So the good news is you have the potential to change this, and it starts in here, healing the hurts that dim your light. And you do this both through brain healing and through a loving and honest self-assessment around where you might be putting up a barrier between where you are and what you want. Now, what kind of barriers? Well, maybe you're not taking care of yourself, or you're letting TV and spacing out take up all your free time, or you're being way over busy, or this is a big one, you're isolating. Nowadays, it's easier than ever to just isolate, and if this is your tendency, I urge you to fight it, and to fight the 100 ways your light gets turned off right when you need it. So what are some of the things that hide your light? Well, number one, being already in a relationship that's not healthy or happy for you. Bad relationships, they wreck your good looks, they wreck your sparkle, they squash your confidence. When you know it's bad, the best thing you can do is just to get out fast. And though you might be thinking that you can hold on for a while until you meet the right person, healthy people don't want to meet you like that. They don't want to be involved with people who are already attached or with people who are too insecure to be on their own when that's the right thing to do. You want a person who's picky like that, not someone who gets into relationships that are compromised or demeaning. You want someone who cares about themselves enough to hold out for a good person, someone bright and shiny and whole and available. That's what healthy people do. This is all stuff that I teach in my dating and relationships course for people with childhood PTSD, by the way, and in my coaching program. And those are always linked in the description section below my videos in case you want to check those out. So how can you tell if you're sending signals that you're not truly available? This is where a loving and honest self-assessment comes in, to ask yourself if maybe there are barriers that you're putting up that are keeping the good partners away. Addictions would fall into this category. Drugs, drinking, porn, for example, are all things that people feel like they're doing privately, but in reality, they change your energy. They change your countenance. Unhealed people might not be able to tell the difference, but healthy people can tell pretty quickly, and they're not attracted. So carrying a lot of anger is another barrier. Also having a lot of drama or conflict. Not that you can always control this, but a lot of times a pattern of drama and conflict could point to a lot of wounding and a high probability that this is what you would bring to a relationship. So just like addictions and anger, drama and conflict deserve to be at the top of your list for where to focus your healing when you're working on shining that light of yours. Another barrier is when your romantic energy isn't, contained within you. Right there, like ready to be shared with another person when the time is right. So you could be leaking that potential, that emotional availability all around you with maybe staying too connected to an ex or two, or being caught up in a casual relationship where you have some vague plan to just get rid of them if the right person comes along. It's easy to think that it's a small thing, and if no one really knows about it, it won't affect your ability to meet someone new. But you know what my experience is. It dims your cab light. And healthy people who are looking for someone intact and capable of sharing their lives in a good way, they're just not likely to be interested in someone who has one foot in another relationship. Even if that's a fantasy relationship, healthy people can sense that too. They're looking for a bright cab light, someone who's totally there, mostly healed, free of past entanglements. And it might be hard to hear, but I'm telling you, it's a very powerful shift to make. I've found that people with a rough childhood can have great relationships. It just takes a little healing sometimes.